Okay, great. Thank you everyone for coming today on this Earth Day, and we're going to do a bit of a presentation, probably take around 25 or so minutes, and then there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. But if anyone has any questions as we go through, please just put them on the chat box and I'll try and answer them as we go through. But like I said, there'll be time at the end for us to go through some questions. Just want to start today by saying that often these webinars on Earth Day and different things like that can often leave people more confused afterwards than when they arrive, because of different terms, sustainability, net zero, and different jargon like that can all seem quite confusing. And I appreciate that fundamentally the reason why you're all here today is because you want to try and do the right thing and know what the right thing is. So I often say that perfect is the enemy of good, and it stops you from doing anything because you want to try and do the best thing, and that kind of just stops you doing something that's good. So within in terms of a sustainability sense, I think this is very often the case. So today I kind of want to just strip it all back a little bit and just try and look at some real simple examples and simple things that we can all do in our lives to try and do the right thing. So if we there we go. Just quickly go over what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, look at why it's important to look at the life cycle of different items, and then do a bit of a deep dive into 3 specific items. So looking at plastic bottles, coffee cups, and paper, looking at their impact on the world, and then, like I said, trying to take home some real examples in which we can do to limit their impact on the world. So why is it important to look at this today on Earth Day? Well, it mainly comes down to the circular economy, and I know I said that I was going to make things all simple for everyone today, and I've started with the circular economy, which is often a term that's used that has no real clear meaning. But here's a definition from RAP, and it talks about circular economy as an alternative to the traditional linear economy of just make, use, and dispose. And the circular economy will keep resources in use for as long as possible, then extract the maximum value out of them, and then recover the materials at the end. And then the little diagram on the left-hand side just simplifies it again. So you don't know where you start on a circular model, but if we start at the top with the manufacturing, and then you consume, and then you recycle it, and some things do get lost, but then some things replace them. But the circular economy looks a bit like that. So it basically just stops the take, make, dispose model and creates a take, make, reuse model. And if you think about the current consumer society that we live in, not be surprised that resources have tripled since 1970, and it looks like they're going to double again by 2050 if we continue. And if that happens, then we will need 1.5 Earths to maintain our consumption, and last time I counted we only had 1. But if we move to a circular economy and they're kept in resource for longer, then the Ellen MacArthur Foundation reckon that we'll be able to reduce global emissions by up to 40%, and 40% is quite a lot. So it's this implementing the circular economy is quite a big deal. So one of the big reasons to think about it and look at it today on Earth Day. And the reason for this is just that resources and getting new resources can be very carbon intensive. So by recycling items, it makes it less carbon intensive. And the recycling element's whole aim of this is to make sure that those resources are kept in the loop as much as possible and allows them to have a second life and a third life and so on. So the first item that we'll look at today is the plastic bottles in the UK. So we use about 7.7 billion plastic bottles in the UK each year, which I think is absolutely staggering because that's about 150 each and about 3 a week. I think that's quite a lot. And I thought to look at plastic bottles footprint, it would be good to look at how they're made in the first place. So fundamentally, plastics are made from oil. The oil is distilled and then it's made up into different fractions and different science stuff. I'm not going to go too much into it because I don't understand it. But the oil is separated out into different fractions, and then part of that is made to use plastics, and then it goes through a process called polymerization. And then this is then used to make the different types of plastics. So PET, polyethylene terephthalate, is used to make your plastic water bottles, and that's your number one on the RIC codes. So the manufacturing of these pellets uses up about 30% of all the CO2 footprint in a plastic bottle. That doesn't include the the mining of that oil or the transportation and things like that. It's just the manufacturing of that pellet. And that's only the CO2 footprint of a plastic bottle. That doesn't include the non-carbon impacts of producing plastic. So large areas of land and sea used to mine and get this oil. And then also you can have major disasters associated with that. So the BP oil spill back in 2010 that destroyed the Gulf of Mexico and destroyed lots of wildlife along the way. And this picture I think is absolutely terrifying because that pelican's eye is just staring right at you. And then don't forget that if that item, that plastic bottle, isn't kept in the loop and is sent for incineration, it'll be burnt and cause more CO2. But if it's put in landfill, then it'll sit there for 100 years until it decomposes. And one thing about plastic is that plastic doesn't break down, it breaks up, and it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces until it becomes microplastics. And not to frighten anyone too much, but the idea of plastic being in our lungs and being in our blood kind of weirds me out a little bit and gives me the heebie-jeebies. So we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. If we look at coffee cups, if we use 7.7 billion plastic bottles, coffee cups aren't too far behind. There's now 4 times as many coffee shops in the UK today as there were in 2000, and 1 in 5 of us visit a coffee shop every day. And that results in about 2.5 billion coffee cups being used and thrown away each year, and that's enough to stretch around the world roughly 5.5 times. And it's also forecasted that by 2030, there'll be 33% increase in the amount of cups that we use. And this would be okay, I think, if we recycled them, but less than 1 in 400, so just 0.25% of coffee cups are recycled. So that means we're producing 30,000 tons of coffee cup waste each year. And looking kind of at the footprint of them in terms of the manufacturing, they use a lot of water to manufacture them. So that's the same as 800 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and they produce 60 grams of CO2 per cup. So it's a lot. And then finally, if we do a bit of a deep dive into paper. So in Europe, we use an average of 120, 119 kilograms of paper each year, which is the same as driving 600 kilometers. We hear a lot about reducing our driving and transportation, but there's not as common that we hear about reducing our paper use, because that's a lot. And in the UK, it's 12.5 million tons of paper each year. And if we equate that to the amount of trees it takes to produce that paper, if it's all made from virgin material, that's enough trees that's the same size as Wales to produce. So not a small area. And again, this doesn't take into account the other detrimental effects of paper production. So forests and trees, they're the lungs of the earth, and without them we don't exist. And also the wildlife and nature and habitats that live in these forests and live in these trees will also be destroyed. And deforestation, even though it took a little bit of a lull within the last 10 years, deforestation is on the increase recently. So instead of having pictures like that, even though there's a little bit of deforestation, we're getting pictures like this more and more often. So what can we do about it? I've painted a bit of a negative picture right now and looked at all the things that we're doing and how they're all terrible and well, what can we do to make it better? And like I said at the start, I want to try and keep things simple, because often we get caught up in trying to do the best thing, and that often leads to inaction. So right now, I just want to bring it back down to basics. And often at Paper Round, we speak a lot about the waste hierarchy. And even though we are a waste management company that, and in theory we want as much waste and recycling as possible because that's what our business depends on, but we started from Friends of the Earth as a charity organization, and the sustainability and the doing the right thing element still runs through our business today, and we always promote as high up the waste hierarchy as possible. So even though recycling, and in society we often speak about recycling, and you see on your plastic bottles it says please recycle me and things like that. But if you think about back in primary school when you learned reduce, reuse, recycle, and you look at this hierarchy, there are lots of things that you can do above recycling. So even though recycling is good, there are other things that we can also do to do even more. And in order to do those, well, all things on the waste hierarchy that isn't just chuck it in landfill, you need good engagement. So I want to thank you guys again for coming today to listen to this and giving up your Fridays. Because without engagement and without us talking about this and learning about it, then we're not going to make any changes or improvements. And hopefully, if I listen to me ramble on, you'll be able to talk to your friends and colleagues about it and what you've learned today, and put those things into practice. So now if we look at the different items that we've just talked through, and look through the waste hierarchy, we can see what actions we can take. So first off, the plastic bottles. We learned that 30% of the CO2 comes from making the pellets. So if we recycle the bottles and new bottles are made from recycled bottles, then we can save between 30 and 70% of the total footprint of plastic bottles, because you don't need to make the new pellets, you don't need to mine the oil, you don't need to transport it from where it's mined to where it's made, from where the pellets are made to where the bottle is made. This can all be done in a recycled bottle plant. So if the 7.7 billion bottles that we used and were recycled in the UK, we would save the same amount of CO2 as 100 million trees. So that's about half the size of Wales. So that's good. About 350 gallons of oil, and don't forget the land won't be scarred, and the birds won't be covered in oil. And probably the most important thing is that our blood won't have little bits of plastic floating around in it as much. So that's always good. But what's better than recycling, like we just spoke about, is to not buy them in the first place. So buy a reusable bottle and reuse it. Bring it into work, take it into the gym, and when you're out and about with your plastic water bottle, there's an app, refill app, and it shows you all the locations in London where there's a water fountain where you can refill your bottle, or there are different bars, restaurants, outlets that allow you to refill your bottle. So you can use that app and you can refill your bottle. And I know we said that reducing is also above that in the waste hierarchy, but I wouldn't recommend anyone to reduce their water intake, because I think we should be drinking something like 4 liters of water a day, and that's hard to do. So the next thing is coffee cups. So by recycling your coffee cups, it reduces their footprint by about 50%. Meaning if we recycle all our cups, we're saving the same amount of CO2 as what 20,000 cars in the UK produce each year. So again, not a small amount. But coffee cups are hard because of their makeup, because they've got plastic on the inside to make them waterproof and paper on the outside. They can't be recycled in the same way as other things are recycled in your mixed recycling stream. So they have to be recycled in their own stream. We have that waste stream through Paper Round, and we provide lots of our clients with a coffee cup waste stream, but it's hard when you're out and about with a coffee cup, because that's often when you do have your single-use plastic or single-use coffee cup, is when you're out and about. It's hard to be able to recycle them. In the London Bridge area, we did a scheme with the London Bridge team, London Bridge, and there are coffee cup bins about, but they're not always everywhere. So You know what's better than recycling is reducing. So take a reusable cup with you. There are lots of, not during COVID, it kind of put a stop to a bit of it, but places are now accepting your reusable cups, and you can often get a discount if you take your reusable cup. And Scotland is also currently in the process of passing a law which means that every single use coffee cup that is sold or used at a coffee outlet, it costs 25p to use that cup. So if Scotland are doing it, it's only a matter of time until that law gets passed everywhere else. And I don't know about you, but I find reusable cups are a lot easier to drink from and to hold. And you can also get cool branded ones like you can see on your screen. And the refill app also allows you to see what outlets allow you to use these reusable cups and give you money off if you do them. And you know what's better than that is reducing. So don't use any cups. And I personally don't drink tea or coffee, so I can't really speak too much about this. But if you reduce your coffee intake, not only, I mean, we haven't even started looking at coffee and coffee grounds and the production of them. We're just looking at the cups. But if you do stop drinking it, then you'll reduce the CO2 footprint and the water use to produce those coffee cups even more. And then the final item that we looked at was paper. So 1 ton of paper is about the same as 900 kilograms of CO2, and that's the same as 25 million plastic straws. So again, we like I said about paper earlier, we hear about driving less, we hear about removing plastic straws, but we don't hear the using less paper is spoken about, but it's not really looked at in the same way. If we recycle paper, it takes 70% less energy and water to recycle paper, or to make paper from recycled paper rather than from virgin materials. And again, that's only looking at the energy and the water use. We're not thinking about, well, we're not putting a number on the habitats and the wildlife that you'll be protecting if we are cutting down trees. But 30% is still a lot. So what's better than recycling is reusing. It's quite hard. Sorry, I've lost my thought. But it's 30% of the 30% energy and water used to create that paper is still quite a lot. So I think we should just reduce the amount of paper we do, and we stare at our computer screens and our phones 24/7 pretty much. So we don't need paper. And as Bernie Saunders says, it could just be an email. We don't need to print things out. We don't need to send people documents. We can send them an emails and we look at them on our screens. So that's kind of looking at those three things and looking at those three items and what we can do. But if we look at kind of broader and look at other tips and things that we can do to promote the circular economy in the office, not just around those items, but kind of in everything we do. So we've spoken about reduce and reuse / repair and recycle, and that's a key thing to do. But to understand what we can reduce and what we can recycle and so on, it's always good to carry out an audit and to really understand what you are using and what you can move to be reusables. And then make that switch to reusables. And if you can't, then you try and get items that are sourced from recycled content or items that can be recycled. So we have an office supplies team here at Paper Round. And they go into offices and they can do audits and look at what you are producing and then make recommendations. And we have a website which shows all the things that we can sell and tell you how much of that is made from recycled content and if it's got a sustainability accreditation attached to it and things like that. So if you want to know more about that, then let me know. But then finally, I've said at the start, I've said in the middle, you know, the engagement around this is where really you're going to see the benefits. So tell your colleagues about what you're doing personally or what's happening in the office, and have those conversations with people, because it's all good. We can have these one day a year or on special events. We talk about it, but we need this engagement and we need these conversations between everyone on a day-to-day basis, not just at random events. That's kind of all I planned on speaking about today, but just kind of I really liked this picture when I came across it, because like I said at the start, we can often get caught up in the jargon and not knowing what to do, and kind of, oh, we're not in control of that, or I can't do this, I can't do that. But the simple acts that I've kind of laid out today or spoken about today, so our amount of plastic bottles we use, the amount of coffee cups we use, and the amount of paper we use, these are all things that we control. And to steal a quote from Paddy McGuinness, the power is in our hands with these things. These are actually things that we can control, and that we can make those changes in our day-to-day lives from now.